Welcome to Navigating Career Change, Working with MS is Possible. This webinar and telelearning series is brought to you by Can Do Multiple Sclerosis and the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. It is the first in a 4-part series looking at employment issues and MS. My name is Laura Coyne, and I'm the Programs Manager for Can Do MS. Your moderator this evening is Steve Nissen, the Senior Director of Benefits and Employment with the National MS Society. Can Do MS is an innovative provider of lifestyle empowerment programs for people living with MS and their support partners. Through our programs, we empower people to manage their disease and move beyond their MS by adopting active and healthy lifestyle behaviors. Please visit the Can Do website, mscando.org, to learn more about the Can Do MS online and nationwide in-person programs. Can Do MS is excited to partner with the National MS Society to bring you 15 webinars in 2016. At this time, I would like to introduce your moderator for this evening, Steve Nissen.
Thank you so much, Laura. Welcome, everybody. The mission of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society is to help people that are affected by multiple sclerosis to live their best lives as they stop multiple sclerosis in its tracks, restore what has been lost, and to end MS forever. Please visit our website at www.nationalmssociety.org to explore the Society's programs, services, resources, and connection opportunities. We would like for you to be part of tonight's discussion. We will save about 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the webinar for questions and to give you the answers. If you do have a question, please post them in the chat function located on the left of your computer screen. The slide now shows kind of where you can find that window. To submit a question, type in the small box that says Chat with Presenters. We will take as many questions as we can at the end of tonight's program. Please note that tonight's program is being recorded, and it will be archived on both the Can Do MS's website as well as the National MS Society's website. Because the call is being taped, all telephone lines have been muted. So the topic for tonight's webinar is career change, which is something that many people grapple with at some point of their working lives. Having MS may alter a person's career path, and it's something else to take into consideration when exploring long-term employment options. This is a highly individualized decision to make. Our speakers this evening will share things to think about in terms of assessing your options and becoming familiar with the resources available to assist you in navigating this important decision. So our speakers this evening are Danielle Moser and Debra Heindel. Danielle Moser is an executive coach with over 20 years experience coaching clients from virtually every industry. She is a founder and managing partner of Blended Learning Team, LLC, which is a career services firm. Since 2001, Danielle has been a pioneer in the delivery of career development and management services in a virtual environment. Our other speaker, Debra Heindel, is a career strategist with over 25 years experience working with clients in transition and in need of career clarity. She is also a founder and managing partner of Blended Learning Team, LLC. Debra has been affiliated with a major international career services and outplacement firm since 1994. Danielle and Debra are co-authors of Focus, Creating Career and Brand Clarity, which outlines a very simple, easy to follow process that helps professionals gain clarity to be able to develop an entrepreneurial approach to self-marketing. Danielle and Debra, I turn the floor over to you.
Thanks so much, Steve. Everybody, this is Danielle Moser. We're thrilled to be here, and we would like to say thank you to Can Do MS and the National MS Society teams for inviting us. and most importantly to all of you for being with us tonight. I also want to just offer a heartfelt thank you to our colleague, Linda Sumner, who's on the call with us tonight. Debra, Linda, and I have all worked together since the early 90s. In 1997, Linda was diagnosed with MS, and we've watched how the disease has had an impact on her at work. For example, she's gone from working on site to working virtually, as she's got an employer that is willing to make accommodations. Debra?
So hi everyone, I'm Debra Heindel. And in addition to Linda, we do want to just make note of the fact that one of our colleagues from Blended Learning team, Renee Zung, is on the call with us tonight. Now she's not going to be speaking, but she is lending us some moral support, and she's definitely a valued member of our team. So basically it was Linda who brought us into this opportunity. Linda approached us to deliver this webinar, and I'll be honest with you, at first when she approached us, we were a little hesitant. We've been delivering career management webinars for many years, but we were a little bit concerned because neither Danielle nor I have been diagnosed with MS. And it was really Linda who reminded us that we actually are pretty familiar with it since we've walked alongside her through the many years. So the three of us sat down and we put together an agenda and this presentation for you tonight. And as we were planning it and discussing it, what happened was we started to realize that really managing your career without MS is pretty similar to managing your career with MS. You just have to take into account the unique circumstances that come from having MS. So in our book, Focus, Creating Career and Brand Clarity, we talk about the fact that lifetime employment has actually been replaced by lifetime employability. In that, we talk about creating sustainable employability, and that is having the capability to move self-sufficiently within the job market and to be continually employed, though not necessarily continuously employed, for a lifetime. In other words, creating sustainable employability is largely about strategy. So with that in mind, what we've done is we've outlined a four-part agenda for managing your employability with MS. And as the title of this presentation suggests, you can work with MS. In fact, not only can you work with MS, you may even be able to find that you'll be able to flourish at work. And we'll talk about more about flourishing in a few minutes, so stay tuned. So here are the main stages. We talk about assess yourself, and we're talking about your symptoms, but not just your symptoms, your job and your skills. We talk about exploring career options. Is it a job accommodation, or do you actually need to change your career? And then we'll talk about how you identify resources, exercises, templates, web tools. Finally, we create a framework in order to make a decision. Let's start with assessment. So some of you may be thinking that you need to immediately quit your job. And this presentation, you're thinking, is going to tell you how to do that. But that's simply not the case. You may not have to change anything, so don't panic. Don't forget that there are new medications, new technologies, and exercises that may eliminate any outward symptoms. So what we recommend is that you are sure to partner with healthcare providers, and I would suggest partnering with those healthcare providers even before you address your diagnosis with your employer. There really can be simple solutions. Well, of course, you will want to assess yourself in the terms of symptoms, but you also will want to assess yourself in terms of your job and your skills and your talents and those that you're offering to the marketplace, because you want to make sure that they continue to be in demand. Finally, there are a great many tools available to help, And they're available to help you not just manage your MS, but also to manage your career. And that's what we're going to be focusing on tonight. So in the next couple of slides, we're going to be showing you some career options, especially the first couple that will use case study scenarios that might bring these examples to life. But before we do that, let's take a poll. If you would, answer the poll question on the screen, select the option that is the most appropriate for you, and then click to submit.
Without the audio, just wanted to have a read. So one of the things I want to do is let's circle back to what Debra said before the poll about the fact that you may not have to change your job. Here are some questions that you might ask yourself as you explore options. Now remember, Debra said, don't panic. You want to do some of this assessment first before you make any declarations to your employer, for example. So here are some of the questions that you might want to ask. Well, what kind of MS do you have? For example, is it relapsing and remitting, or is it primary progressive? That's going to matter. What are your symptoms? And what are the impact of those symptoms? We're going to share some tools later to help with that. We're going to kind of give you some guidelines as to where to find those. Are there workplace accommodations that will allow you to continue in your current role? That for most people might be the first place where they want to start. Again, we recommend that you talk to your doctor before you talk with your employer, because as Debra said, there may be symptoms that can be addressed with medication or with exercise. That would mean you don't need to disclose to your employer at all. And bladder control might be an example of that. Now, what if you need, or what if you want to change a career? Let's explore that next. As we do that, for anybody exploring a career change, there are 4 questions to ask. Will you work in your current profession or a different profession? And just as clarification as we're talking about this, a profession is simply your area of expertise. That's the way we're defining profession, pretty broadly. Next, will you work in your current industry, or will you work in a different industry? And so we're going to look at some scenarios that would help bring this to life, because these questions are the framework, and one of the reasons we wanted to make sure you got a copy of the deck is so you can come back and take a look at this later on and have that framework to use as a guide for yourself. But we're going to look at some different examples here. You know, it's an intriguing question. It's a great starting point. So let's look at some of those examples in a little bit more detail. So the first one at which it is we're going to be looking is current profession, current industry. And to be fair, I think really what it is that we're talking about here are accommodations. And so here we have a professional trainer, and their symptoms were impacted them in terms of how steady they were on their feet. And they needed to be sitting instead of standing. So here you can see the difference between going from the in-person standing up in front of platform kind of training is what they call it, to a virtual kind of an environment. Another example might be from an accommodation perspective, that is bladder issues. For instance, only being able to teach in smaller blocks of time, perhaps 60 or 90 minutes versus 4 hours in a platform kind of a setting. But what if accommodations aren't an option? Because let's face it, sometimes they're not an option. And so if that's the case, then what we want to take a look at are current profession but a different industry. So in other words, staying in a role that's very similar to what it is that you've been doing, but doing that in a different industry. Different industries feel different. And there are a number of you that indicated that you've made a change. I'm guessing that there's a portion of you who have not only changed the profession, but also have changed the industry. So this is an example of an HR director who was impacted by his gait. So in his current industry, he was in manufacturing. He had to visit job sites, but that was becoming unsafe for him. So when he switched industries, in this case he switched to healthcare, he was able to work in a more centralized kind of a location. The next example at which it is that we're going to be looking is a different profession, but in the woman's current industry. This is a story that actually Steve shared with us. He said it was one of his favorite examples that kind of illustrated this kind of a shift. The woman was an interior designer. She went colorblind, and so she was no longer able to do interior decorating. She was able to change her role, though, becoming an office manager in an architecture and design firm. So she was in a creative environment, part of a team, because she was no longer able to do it herself. So it was a way to stay connected to her passion and use some of her skills, even if it wasn't in the same capacity as she had previously done. The final example at which we're going to look is a woman who found a role in a different profession and in a different industry. I think one of the things that's important to keep in mind about this, though, is that it doesn't have to be a completely unrelated industry. In this example, the woman had a degree in kinesthetic sports, and she was a trainer. She was a sports trainer. She was diagnosed with MS. It also impacted her gait and her steadiness on her feet, and that meant that it was no longer safe for her to run out onto the field if an athlete or a student got hurt. So as part of her role, obviously she had interacted with healthcare professionals in her community, those that were treating sports injuries. She knew of an orthopedic surgeon. They happened to be looking for someone to run their office. And so she was able to leverage the knowledge and the expertise that she had. Although it was in a different capacity, she was able to put that to work by going to work as the office manager for the orthopedic surgeon's office. So what if you decide you need to make a change? How will you decide?
Well, let's start with a story. So it's Debra again, and let's talk a little bit about a pine tree. Several years ago, my husband and I purchased a home that was previously owned. We bought it from a previous owner, and on the back porch, on our redwood deck, it was a beautiful redwood deck, there was this pine tree growing in a planter box. And there was nothing wrong with the pine tree at all. But it felt odd for us to have this pine tree growing in a planter box when we had a big backyard. We weren't living in an apartment where that would be, an option. We had a backyard, and this pine tree was growing in the planter box. And even though there was nothing wrong with it, it was green, it was growing, there was absolutely nothing wrong with it. To us, it just felt odd to have a pine tree growing in a planter box. Now, please don't email me if you are a planter box person, because it's unique to everybody, right? We all have our choices. But we decided we were going to plant that pine tree in the backyard. So my husband planted the pine tree, and several months later, you know what? That pine tree not only started to live, or continued to live, I should say, but it actually started to grow. And it grew, and it grew, and it actually flourished. And I'll bet, we've not been back there for a little while, but I would bet you that that pine tree is now several, I don't know if it's 100 feet tall, but I bet it's about 30 feet tall. And what that said to me was, you know what? That's exactly the way we are in our work. There are environments where we can exist. There are places like the planter box where we can work and exist and grow and live. But then there are these environments where we could flourish, just like the pine tree. And so it occurred to me, it's like if we could figure out a way to evaluate that, to be able to say, hey, what's my environment? Where is it that I will actually flourish in my job? Then I would have a way to evaluate options. Because sometimes when those options come to you, they aren't quite equal. You know, should I be a fireman or should I be a nurse? How do I compare those two? Well, we decided that it was really important to begin to think about where would you flourish. So that's our question, where would you flourish? Now in our book we talk about it from the perspective of finding that ideal role. So the quote from the book says, when you identify the perfect career option, it's about finding a role and an environment, and that's a real critical piece, in which you can be successful and flourish, loving what you do, but also being appreciated for that, and ultimately being your best self at work. So next we're going to take a look at some exercises that would help you identify where you would flourish. And Danielle's going to explain that for you.
We actually created a tool to help with that, and we call it the Flourish Factor Profile. And again, one of the reasons we wanted to give you the handout is because we gave you these exercises. And we're going to walk you through them kind of top line in an effort to help you understand why it's so important to do them and what kinds of information you should be able to draw from it. So this all has to happen kind of in concert of looking at the impact, obviously, of the MS on the symptoms on your work life. And there are tools to help with that, and our intention is that this can support that so that if you're going to make a change, that you look to make a change that's as best a fit as possible. So by going through the exercises, the idea is that you're going to create a baseline for yourself that can help you to evaluate different opportunities. Again, if you're going to make a change, let's work to help make that change as strong a change as possible. So as you explore options, in other words, the closer that you match the profile, the greater your chance of success and satisfaction in the work that it is that you're going to be doing. And so we're going to review these resources and exercises next and kind of walk you through what those look like. So this is a listing of the exercises that we're providing. And the list of exercises, we're going to walk through the marketable or transferable skills. So if you are looking at different or current profession, current industry, you know, the 4 different kinds of scenarios that we talked about, especially if you're looking at a different role or a different industry, the transferable skills piece is going to be pretty important. Debra is going to explain the irrepressible skills. That's when we are at our best and our biggest value contribution, and that is something that can help you feel confident in making those changes and help make you attractive to an employer. We're going to also look at an exercise that we call in-demand skills, because let's face it, you can't say, well, this is what I want to do if there's no demand for it. You know, I'm very fond of saying, you can't say from this exercise, I decided I would be at my best if I could be a pink, fluffy unicorn that sprouts wings. There's got to be a demand for that pink, fluffy unicorn that sprouts wings. And so that exercise is intended to help ground you to what the demands and the needs of the marketplace are. The last piece, the last exercise that we provided in the handout is called environmental flourish factors. And this is where we look at what's the environment in which you would be strongest. It is kind of values-based, and as I said, Debra will walk you through that. The other online resources that we're going to talk about, hopefully you've already had a chance to explore some of these. The National Multiple Sclerosis Society website, wealth of resources. Same thing with the Can Do Multiple Sclerosis website. Both Steve and Laura talked about these earlier. You'll find many synergies between what resources that are very, very specifically focused on MS and symptoms, for example, that align with what it is that we're talking about tonight. I'm going to walk you through also a couple of resources that are available in the public domain. These are resources that are put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. the Occupational Outlook Handbook, and the ONET Center. It's the ONET Online. And basically ONET stands for Occupational Network Online. So, Deborah, you want to take the first pass at this exercise?
Sure. So first of all, I believe that you should have received through the email these exercises. Now if you haven't, you can go back to the email that you received earlier, but you'll also receive another email, and the Flourish Factor exercises will be included with that. So we're going to give you these exercises. They actually come directly out of our book, but we're going to give you the exercises so that you can begin to work on that Flourish Factor. Now we won't go through all the specific details of the directions, but I want to explain a little bit about the exercise and what that exercise will help you to determine. Basically, as you go through the exercises, as Danielle showed you in the earlier slide, you're going to be asked to put the cream of the crop, if you will, the cream off of the exercises. You're going to skim that top portion of it, and you're going to place it into that Flourish Factor profile. And the hope is that when you complete the exercises, that you will have created a profile from which you can compare options. As I mentioned earlier, how do you decide between being a fireman and a nurse? Well, the key is if you can create this profile where you have identified where you would flourish, then you can compare various opportunities that arrive to you, whether it's somebody suggesting it, your cousin calls you and has a great opportunity, or you use some of the resources, or you simply look at the want ads, that's aging me, the job postings, the online postings. But you can look at that and see, how does this opportunity compare to where I would actually flourish or thrive? So the first exercise we call the Marketable Transferable Skills exercise. And what it does, it kind of walks you through a number of skills. You can see there are skills listed at the bottom. And we have a number of categories. And so the first thing you do is you simply go through the listing and you put a check next to all the skills that you can do. And you don't want to look at that as, am I an expert in that, but just what are the skills that you can do? Now be careful about that, because there will be times that you think, well, I can do that, but if it's really not something you feel particularly strong about, you could probably leave that out. Then the second pass, it's going to ask you to go back through that and put a line through the check marks that you can do, of the skills that you can do, and identify those skills that you can not only do, but you can, but that you like to do. And Danielle is demonstrating not quite the prettiest picture, but you get the idea, right? So you're kind of creating a check mark with an X, all right? And then finally, you're going to do another pass, and those you're going to circle those skills that you can do, that you like to do, and that you excel at. So what the goal is for this is that you're really identifying the cream of the crop. What we want to do through these exercises is not just identify things that you can do, because of course you can do a lot of things, and that's where we get into the situation of the pine tree and the planter box. Remember, the pine tree was existing, but it wasn't flourishing. So what we want to do is identify what are the skills that you are particularly good at and that you enjoy most. And again, in the directions, it will explain all that, and it will walk you through how to then move that information back to the Flourish Factor profile. Well, the second exercise is what we call irrepressible skills, and these are really important to identify, because what these skills identify, or what these exercises rather identify, are the skills that are going to come out of you no matter what. And we all have irrepressible skills. We just don't always identify them. So we have three sort of sections of this exercise. And what we do is we begin by asking you to tell us a story using what we call the STARS format. Well, STARS is just an acronym for first describing the situation and then include the tasks that you were asked to do in that situation. List any actions that you took, bring in the results, and then the final S is what's the significance of that. Well, we have three of these skills because it's important to do these exercises we don't want to do them by just looking at what you have done most recently. So the first exercise is going to ask you to select a story, an accomplishment story, if you will, that you can describe that you have done within the last 2 years. The next exercise takes you back 5 to 7 years. And the third exercise takes you to a personal example. The personal example could be something you did as a volunteer, something you did as a mom or a dad, something you did as in school. It's just something outside the world of work. And what it tells you to do, as you go through the exercises, what you do then is you start to identify some recurring trends, some themes that are happening through each of the stories that you've told. Now what that gives you are your irrepressible skills or traits. And those are very, very important to identify. Let me give you an example. I one time worked with a client that was an executive. And he was a leader. He had been in senior leadership positions. And this client was kind of fried. He was burned out. He said, you know what, Debra, I don't want to do anything like I've been doing. I'm tired of doing that stressful work. I just want to cut grass on a golf course. Well, we did this exercise. And what was clear was that this client was a leader. He had been a leader in the Boy Scouts. He had been a leader in his 7th grade. He was the president of his class. I mean, he had just been a leader. Everything about what he had been doing in the past was showing leadership, leadership, leadership. So then we looked at this option that he thought he wanted to do as cutting grass on a golf course. And he said, you know why, Debra? Because when I get, I'm just going to go out there, I'm going to cut grass. When I get to the 18th hole, I'm just going to start all over again at the first hole. And it's like mindless, I can just do that. But then I said to him, well, wait a minute, let me ask you a couple things. So you're a leader. That's coming out of you. Let's say that you do take this job as a grass cutter on a golf course. What happens when your leadership skills start to pop because they're irrepressible? And what happens when the people, the other grass cutters, start to come to you because you're just a natural leader? How about the boss that sees you being the leader? May not go over very well, right? That boss may think, hey, what's he doing trying to usurp my power? And I'm the boss, and, he's trying to take over. And that could be not the best situation. Well, then the other piece was, I said, but let's look at it from the flip side. Okay, what if you are able to repress those irrepressible skills? And that's something that you can do. We all can do that, but it takes effort to do that. We literally would have to push them down. We would have to, kind of repress those. But I said, what if you were able to do that? And even then, maybe those skills would come out of you. I said, here's the problem with that. What if the hiring manager, or your boss, not the hiring manager, but the supervisor for you, what if that person would say, hey, this guy's a leader. We're going to let him take over and be the leader. At some point you might say, wait a minute. I'm being the leader, but I'm not being paid to be the leader. He's being paid to be the leader, or she's being paid to be the leader, and I'm being the leader, but wait a minute. So I'm now resenting that. So what you can see is these irrepressible skills. We at least have to acknowledge them because they're coming out of you no matter what. Another client I worked with, she found out that organization was one of her irrepressible skills. And she said to me, oh my gosh, Debra, I see that now. And she said, no wonder when I first got laid off from my job and I was not working, I went out and I organized my husband's tools on his workbench in the garage. That was not well received, by the way. I need to let you know that, right? So we have to acknowledge.
You ran out of things to organize.
Right. So the key, though, is maybe she needs to organize just her things, right? We don't necessarily need to reorganize our husband's tools in his garage. But nevertheless, those are things that we need to identify.
Debra, before you move on, I want to just kind of stop just for a second and just reframe, because I know there's a lot of information that's coming right now. And so, we started this conversation by saying we're giving you this environmental flourish factor profile. And the idea is that when you do these exercises, you carry over the results of those exercises to this one page so you have the summary. That's what I was talking about before when I said it's the baseline that's going to help you evaluate different opportunities and different options so that you're finding one that's as closely aligned as you can possibly get, so that there's a real sense of intentionality. So part of what I want to make sure that you're clear about is that there is, on our part, some intentionality about the sequence in which we gave you the exercises. It's easier to start with your skills to be able to look at, this is a multiple page exercise, to be able to check off what are all the things I can do. Maybe I have 100 skills of things that I can do. But just because I can do them doesn't mean I like to do them, which is where we came up with this idea of doing the check marks for all the things that you can do, but then filtering that list down and putting an X through the things that you like to do. And I will just use myself as a for instance. There are things that I can do that I don't like to do. Maybe it's because I feel like at this point in my career I've been there, paid my dues, bought the T-shirt, and I don't want to have to do them anymore. So we want to filter away maybe the 100 things that we can do. Maybe if we look at that list, what are the things that we like to do? Maybe we only have 20. But from there, just because I can do it and I like to do it, doesn't necessarily mean that it's something at which I excel. And so that's why we ask you to look at all the things that have the check mark with the X and then circling those so that you're looking at that real distilled list. What can I do that I like to do that I'm really good at? Because that's what helps make you really marketable. So then when Debra starts to talk about this exercise with the irrepressible skills, that list, that kind of boiled down list, gives you a great starting point to jog your memory to say, well, what are the things in the last couple of years? Does that list of transferable skills help to give me some ideas of examples that I might use to write out these stories? And I know we're focusing on career options, but I want to just share, Debra, is it okay if I do this? I just want to share that Debra and I are incredibly practical. And so this exercise was designed with a real sense of intentionality. If you make a change, even if you go for another role in your current organization, it's likely you're going to be interviewed. And if you're interviewed, it's likely to be a behavior-based interview. A behavior-based interview is a question where they say, give me an example of a time when you, fill in the blank, a time when you had to juggle multiple priorities, how you decided and what you did. When you're asked a behavior-based question, they're not saying, in general, tell me what you do. They're saying, out of the 619 times you did it, give me a good example and walk me through. Now track with me for a second. Walk me through the example. Describe the situation or the problem. why what you were doing was important or challenging, what action you took, and what the result or the impact of that was. These stories are incredibly efficient. Not only do they help you identify patterns in terms of your irrepressible skills, when you ultimately get to an interview, these will be the stories that you tell in the interview. So I just wanted to make sure that in addition to kind of explaining the practical, kind of tactical levels of this, that you were understanding that we have a master plan behind this as well, that it's really intended to add layers to support you as you might look at options and might look at making a change. So Deborah, thank you for letting me interrupt you.
Absolutely, because that was an excellent explanation. So let me take you to the next exercise in the handout. And here we're identifying what we call environmental flourish factors. Okay, so you're starting to hear the flourish factor again, but in this case, environmental flourish factors, this is a lot like your values. What's important to you? But we decided to take it even a little bit further than values. We wanted to drill it down a little bit to really begin to look at what are all the factors that go into work life. And that could be things like, I don't want to work in an office, or I don't want to work in cubicles, I want to work in an office. Or I want to have a short commute, or those things that are important to us. And so what we did is we listed a number of them. So you don't have to really think them up. We're going to give you a list of those, and you're just simply going to take that list and identify from that list, and you can add your own if you want to, but we've sort of done the thinking for you, but you can add from that list, or rather you can take that list and decide, of those factors, what are those that you absolutely want to have? We talk about them in terms of must-have. What is imperative? I must have this in my work. Then we have a second category that's might want, not so sure I know about it enough. I may want to explore it a little bit more. I could live with it. Maybe I could live without it. So let's start to identify that. Ultimately, you may explore that, and you may look at those might wants and learn a little bit more about that and say, hey, now that I know more about that, I think I want that, or I think I don't want that. And the third one is, what are the things that you don't want? And we call that category the deal breakers. In other words, I absolutely do not want this in the next opportunity. So let me give you an example. If you would look at one of the factors, let's say that you're looking at the factor diversity friendly. I want to work at a company that's diversity friendly. Well, think about that from how important is that to you? Is it an absolute must-have? In other words, if the employer is not diversity friendly, would you turn down an offer from that company? Is that something that you must have? Or is that something that is a deal breaker, you don't want them to be diversity friendly? Or is that something that you would consider, maybe, I might want that? So it just really allows you to kind of flush out those things that are not related to skills or talents, but that are important to you. We all know that there are different environments where we can exist and where we can flourish. Just like in that pine tree where we're looking at these are areas where I would find ideal. All right, the next exercise is what we call the in-demand skills exercise. Now, this is one that is important to do because it is always important to incorporate the needs of the marketplace. Just like Danielle was saying, you can say, this is what I want to do, this is the expertise I want to market, but if there isn't demand for that expertise, if there isn't demand in the marketplace for the skills that you have, well, there are not many organizations that are going to pay you to do that. So what we're suggesting in this in-demand skills exercise is that you actually go out and look at some job postings. And what you'll do is you'll identify a number of job postings that are the types of jobs that you might be interested in. Once you've identified those jobs, and again, we're going to have you select enough. Generally, you're going to want to select somewhere around 6 or 10. You don't want a number that's so small that there's not a theme. You don't need one that's so large that it becomes so vague. But I think 6 to 10 is a good number. And what you're trying to do there is not just look at, would I be interested in this job, but what are the common threads that are being sought these days? What are the skills? What are the credentials? What are the knowledge? And as you can see, we talk about it as KSAs, which is knowledge, skills, and abilities. That's kind of a personnel term, but basically it's just really looking at what's being sought in the marketplace today. And by identifying your own 6 to 10 skills, you're sort of identifying those that you might be interested in, and now we need to see whether those skills are in demand. And again, after each of these exercises, you're going to be asked to go back to that flourish factor and create the profile that would identify the environment where you would actually flourish. So Danielle, I'm going to give it to you.
And I was talking, but I had muted my phone. That doesn't work. The thing that we've been talking about is that this, again, it serves kind of as that baseline, that as you're gathering information about yourself and what's important and what the marketplace wants and what are those things that you absolutely must have in your next role versus those things that would, again, kind of like Debra said, cause you to walk away, that you have a single place at which to be looking at this data. Some of the other resources that we mentioned that we were going to be talking about, I'm just going to kind of refer us back to this list at which we looked earlier. I want to refer you again to some of the online resources, and I'm going to walk you through those real quickly. I do hope that as I'm showing you this screenshot of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society website, that this is a resource with which you are familiar. Again, you'll get a copy of the slides that we've been sharing tonight, so the links will be there. You don't need to worry about writing them down. But you'll select the resources and support. I can read. It's tiny even for me. Resources and support category. Then you can select employment, like what we've shown you here is the landing page, and there is the career options category where you can go to get more resources that are very, very specifically tailored to helping you identify the impact, for example, of your MS, because that has to be a part of that conversation. Next, on the Can Do MS website, under programs, you're going to see the online resources. The other one that I think you find some additional great resources would be under the category called Can Do Life. For example, there are some great resources there that include the library and other useful links. So you'll find links even on the Can Do MS website as well as the NMSS website that talk about some of the things that we're referencing here tonight. So again, just make sure you check those out if you haven't already. Some of the websites that we think are prime in terms of helping you look at and exploring options would be the Occupational Outlook Handbook. The Occupational Outlook Handbook is a website that is run by the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics. And this is a tool that can help you learn about different occupations, their tasks, work environments, salaries, an overall look, for example. One of the things that I think is easy about this is it's kind of like looking at an encyclopedia. It's not going to be complete in-depth, but it'll give you a good sense of, hey, someone told me I should explore this. Where do I go to learn about that? The Occupational Outlook Handbook is a great resource to do some of that exploration. Another resource that's been around for years would be the ONET. Again, it stands for Occupational Network. This is a place to which I direct people all the time when they want to do a little bit more of a deeper dive. In my mind, having worked in a corporate environment, it's kind of like a job analysis of jobs across the nation. What are different occupations in different kinds of categories? What are the different things those jobs are called? There are different exercises that can help you find different occupations based on your skills, your interests, or your values. So again, you can take the information that is the baseline about what you would find optimal and then kind of reality check that, take that next level to say what else is happening out there across the nation. One of their profile pieces that I think is especially handy is that they also have an indication on their occupations that tell you what has a quote-unquote bright outlook, so that you can be looking and saying, okay, well this one is a declining role. That's the last thing I want to hitch my wagon to is a profession or an occupation that might not be growing or flourishing.
So then, what will you decide? That's the question. And I know we've got lots of chats that are coming in that are all different types of questions and things, but let's review the framework that we've talked about today. The first thing that you want to do when you're creating a decision-making framework, and we've already talked about it, but it's really important to say, what are the effects of MS on your work? And don't be afraid to brainstorm with your medical providers, with your colleagues, with folks at the work to see how is it that you can accommodate what you're doing, or as we've talked about, think about, well, if I can't do this particular type of work because of whatever symptom that you're having, what would be some other types of work that might match with my flourish factor? So yes, you definitely want to include the effects that MS is having on you. That's the first piece. But then the second step is look at that flourish factor profile. That's going to tell you things about skills. You may think about skills in a, well, I can only do what I've been doing. Well, that's what we're trying to show you today. Ways to expand those opportunities to look at, okay, what else can I do? Maybe I want to stay in the same industry, but I don't necessarily stay in the same role, and that's what we were talking about early on. We can use those tools to research into it, like Danielle was talking about. Some of those Occupational Outlook Handbook, the ONET online, give you an idea of, wait a minute, what's this occupation and what are the skills? What does that work look like? How much are the salaries in that? Now be careful about that because they're usually just giving you the median salary. But you can kind of look at that, get an idea of what are the different occupations that I might be able to do that would match the flourish factor. Now, again, we've talked about the flourish factor in terms of these exercises. One thing I would encourage you to do is make sure that you are also including your symptoms in that flourish factor. We addressed that at the beginning because that's an important piece. And then what you want to do is look at those other options and say, how closely do these options match where I would flourish? Yeah. Do they match my symptoms, or do they match where I could work based on the symptoms? Do they match the skills that I have? Not just the skills that I have, but those skills that I enjoy and those skills that I'm particularly good at. And do they match the irrepressible skills? Remember at the beginning we talked about the fact that it's not just about being able to do a good job, but being appreciated in that job. And part of that is when your skills are aligned with the needs of that job, when your traits are aligned with the needs of that job, that is when you find that you are appreciated for things that come very naturally to you. And so what you can do is as you compare opportunities against that flourish factor profile, you can say how close is it matching this profile. The closer that it matches the profile, the better the fit. The more successful you'll be, the more you'll enjoy that particular job or opportunity. But there will be times, and this is something I want you to understand, sometimes you will make a decision not to match that flourish factor profile perfectly. There will be times that on purpose, for whatever reason, you're going to say, yes, but I'm going to choose to do something differently. And that's okay. You are allowed to make those choices. But what that flourish factor profile gives you is the opportunity to understand why that particular job may not be fun, but you may choose to do it anyway. In other words, you're saying, I'm not flourishing, I'm existing, but I'm choosing to do that. I have made that informed decision. And that's the piece. We want to put this decision-making process into your hands so that you're able to understand how to make the decision. And then when you make that decision, you can evaluate, this is why I've made that decision and why this is going to let me absolutely flourish, or maybe not for the time being. And truthfully, I've worked with clients throughout the years that whether they had any kind of an illness that would cause symptoms to make them make different decisions, sometimes it's just a matter of their family life. I remember working with a client fairly recently who decided, you know what, this is where I would flourish, but I have a daughter who is, as she put it, 13 going on 30, and I need to not work where I'm traveling a lot and doing different things because I need to have my thumb on this young girl until she's, at an age where I can travel a little bit more. So all of those decisions are going to come into how you decide, but the flourish factor profile is the tool that I believe will really be helpful in terms of making those decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Debra said, you've got to make sure that you're considering your MS in that. And two of the handouts that we reference that can particularly help with that, we wanted to name them so that you have them as a copy of the deck. And when the recording comes out in a few weeks, that you can go back and look very specifically for those particular exercises. We've given you the exercises, all the resources that you need. If they're from the book, we're offering a 20% discount if anybody is interested in purchasing it. You would need to do that through our website. Again, the information is included in the deck, so this is not something that you would need. You just need to know that you have to go to our website in order to get that discount to work. So I know that there are a lot of questions that have come in. We really appreciate you all spending the time with us, and I think we're going to start to look at fielding those now.
Correct. Thank you so much, Danielle and Debra, for sharing that wonderful information. So we're going to try to get to as many questions as we can in the next 10 minutes or so. Dina asks, in regard to the example of leadership, of leadership in an irrepressible skill, I have been in a leadership role for over 15 years. I do it well and like it, but I'm struggling to meet all the responsibilities of a leader in a reliable, consistent way. I have a good reputation in my community, and I find in job searching people can't understand why I'm interested in non-leadership roles. How do I convince them I don't want the top jobs without disclosing that I have MS?
So I'll take it, Danielle, to start with, and you can add to that. So the great question, first of all. That is excellent. And it is important to at least acknowledge that if that's an irrepressible skill, we have to look at that. The key, though, is to think about why are they concerned about that? for the most part, what they're concerned of is they're thinking that you are not necessarily going to stay with them. A lot of times what hiring managers are thinking is, if you are overqualified, you're either not going to stay with me or you're going to be somewhat disruptive. They're concerned that, you were once a leader and now you're taking this position. You might be a threat to me. You might be someone that's disruptive to the organization because you're trying to lead the other team members, or you may just be saying, I'll take this job, but it's a stepping stone, and so I am going to do this until I can find something better. So usually that has to do more with your ability to convince them why you want that role as opposed to why you would be willing to settle for that role. In other words, focus them on why this particular role is ideal for you. What is it that you like about this? What is it about your current situation? You don't have to reveal the MS, but just bringing it in. I'd like more work-life balance. I've been the manager. Now I'm really interested because what my passion is really more about is being an individual contributor. And so you can try to overcome those concerns. But again, the concern is not so much first of all, you've got to think about what is their concern, and then you think about what's the real concern. And most of the time, it's that you will leave or you will be disruptive. And you can overcome that just by talking about the why you like that particular role or position. Danielle, do you have anything else to add?
No, but I want to make it kind of toss it open to Laura or Barbara or Steve or Christina, anybody who's got something else they want to add to that.
I appreciate, no, I have nothing further to contribute. Thank you. We got another question here, wondering if this might be able to talk. Judy asked, my symptoms have been memory retention problems and difficulty with multitasking and cognitive impairment. How do I possibly continue with a teaching career? I'm wondering if maybe you might be able to talk about maybe transferable skills with that question, or kind of how a person might use those teaching skills, but that would be more accommodating to those types of symptoms, of the cognitive symptoms.
I mean, I think one of the things to consider is, there's always the balance between what is it that you do and love to do, and where might the disease be impacting your ability to deliver what it is that your students need. And so, potentially with the transferable skills exercise, it can allow you to pull the focal lens back a little bit to see, okay, where else might I be able to contribute in the capacity of helping children learn, for example, assuming that you're teaching kids, but not have the responsibility, for example, for full classroom management. So are there potentially roles that might exist, for example, from a resource perspective, where you could still work in that environment, still interact with the kids, still promote their learning and facilitate that without having the added responsibility and stress which might be exacerbating those symptoms?
I would also add, I think sometimes you can look at how might you be able to adapt. And you can do that, you might brainstorm that with some other folks that are colleagues or just people that can be supportive of you, to look at what might be some other ways to adapt. And, we talk about our colleague Linda, and so Linda and I were talking recently about a task that we both have to do, right? And so I was explaining it, and I said, you just use your mouse and right-click and, copy and paste. And she said, I really have difficulty using a mouse, so I use the keyboard only. Well, she gets the work done the same way, right? So she's using the keyboard, which, works better for her, and I'm using the mouse. But we're both getting the work done. And so you want to look at that, break out into that, sort of get your mind out of the box thinking in the sense of how else could I deliver this? Now, there could be times, just like Danielle is saying, that you say, oh, I can't do the classroom management. But what might be some others? I guess that my suggestion is to encourage you to begin thinking about ways that you can break out of the box and then brainstorm. Don't think that you have to come up with the answers yourself. There's great resources through the websites that we've shared today, through these excellent partners of the National Multiple Sclerosis Society and Can Do MS. And you can, network and brainstorm. And I would do that because I think there probably are a lot of people that have gone through the situations that you're going through that, we may have, here's how Joe did it, and it's a simple solution. So use the tools and the resources that you have.
We have a question from Jeff. I have issues with memory and I'm having a hard time in my current job. Do you have any recommendations when I'm looking for a different industry and a different profession? It's hard to maybe necessarily answer that without knowing exactly what Jeff's current industry and current profession is, but that's maybe just kind of thinking about kind of those 4 different kind of options that people have when people are contemplating this career management, career change, in terms of any kind of general advice if it's a complete different industry and a different profession.
Danielle, do you want to take it or want me to? I'm okay.
Yeah.
All right. So here, again, I go back to, there's not like a quick answer to that. So obviously, we can't say, oh, here's something that you need to do. But I really do encourage you to consider the different options, and that would be current industry, the same industry you're in, and the same role, or exploring a different industry but the same role. And we saw that, where we saw in one industry that HR manager was going to have to travel to different sites, but in another industry, that's not a requirement. So be looking at that. Same thing with current industry but different profession. Sometimes, and this is really something that's fairly common to most of us, because this is really something that happens when we get promoted, right? Because it's the same industry, but now instead of being the worker bee, I'm the manager. Well, there's a whole different set of skills, and that's a different profession if you look at that. So different industry, same industry, different profession, and then different profession and different industry. And that may be a complete change, but as Danielle was showing in some of those scenarios, it doesn't have to be completely unrelated. It could be in a field that is related to what you've been doing. And so those would be some things. And I think, it's kind of tough to just say right off the spot, here's what you need to do. I think walking through those exercises and exploring some of the options through the ONET Online and the Occupational Outlook Handbook, and even just looking at some of the job postings that are out there, and really beginning to think about it from the perspective of, does this match with where I am? Does it match my flourish factor? And does it help with my symptoms?
Yeah.
The other thing is, go ahead, Danielle.
Oh, I was just going to say, Jeff, I think the other thing, when it comes to memory, doing an assessment and the symptoms documents that we were referencing here on this slide, I think can help with that. Is the role that you're doing very specific? You mentioned the memory issues are becoming are impacting your current role. If you were to do a role that's similar to that, like I'm not articulating the thought that I have in my head at the moment really well. What are those memory issues, and are there accommodations that can be made to help mitigate those, either in your current role or in a role that might be somewhat related to it, so that you can perhaps leverage the industry experience that you have? That was a big global question, so hopefully that helps.
I'll add a little bit, because our friend Linda is chatting us, giving us advice. But she did say, remind people in that Occupational Outlook Handbook, not only does it have, your occupations, but it does have related occupations. So what you can do is look at what's your current occupation, and then what are some related occupations that might work for you given the situation. So thank you, Linda, for sharing that.
Great. In the interest of time, we've got so many questions coming here, but unfortunately we only have a few more minutes left on tonight's program, so maybe we'll take one more. Joanna writes, I worked as an archaeologist for many years. My MS progressed suddenly. Now I use a wheelchair, so I need to find some new direction. I would like to find a new career direction, but know nothing about other possible quote-unquote industries to explore. How do I start to learn about new potential categories of work?
The tools that we just shared, that's the best place I would suggest, and that would be the Occupational Outlook Handbook and the ONET Online. And the reason for that is it's updated yearly. It is, gives you clear information about what the work looks like, what's the salary, but it gives you, are they working outside and climbing telephone poles, or are you sitting in an office? And it really, they are both very, very good tools. Now, I always encourage the folks that I work with to be careful about looking at that too soon, because if you start looking at them, you start seeing, oh, I could do that, oh, I could do that, and you get a little bit more confused than when you started. But if you can use that information and compare it against that flourish factor profile, where you can say, this is why this occupation is a good match for what I'm looking for, I think that's really helpful.
Because it'll tell you what are occupations that are somewhat related and where you may be able to leverage, again, that experience and that expertise to put it to work.
Perfect. Well, Debra, Danielle, thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your evening with us. And like I said, there were plenty of other questions. We will also try to do follow-up to some of those questions that came in. And Laura, I'll turn the floor back over to you now.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Danielle and Debra, and Steve as well. As we conclude, I would like to inform you of some additional resources that you may find informative and helpful. On the Can Do MS website, mscando.org, you will find archive webinars, as well as an archived version of this webinar, which will be on the website by the end of the day tomorrow, e-news, and library articles, including an article on managing your employability with MS, which was written by Danielle and Debra. We have a written version as well as an audio version of that article. You can also submit a question to Ask the Can Do team, which will be answered by one of our team of MS experts. I'm going to turn it back to Steve, and thank you very much for your participation.
I just wanted to highlight a few of the National MS Society resources that deal with employment-related issues. We have a variety of different employment brochures. You see here on the slide a couple of those titles, The Win-Win Approach, Should I Work? But we do have a slew of other brochures dealing with other types of employment-related issues, including some information that's geared towards the employer community. Employment Matters is comprised of video segments about key employment-related issues, and there's also a toolkit that is a companion guide which is geared towards job searching activities. The website that is listed here, nationalmssociety.org/employment, is full of employment-related information, including disclosure, accommodations, as well as additional information on career change and resources. If you do have an employment-related question that was not answered during tonight's call, feel free to actually contact us. We do offer some benefits and employment services, so feel free to send those questions to the email address that you see on the slide now, employmentquestions@nmss.org, or you can always call us toll-free at 1-800-344-4867.
Terrific.
Laura, I'll turn it back to you.
And the next presentation in our webinar and telelearning series will be on Tuesday, February 23rd at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern. It is the second in our 4-part series Unemployment Issues with MS, and the title of that webinar is Managing Your MS Symptoms with Technology. As always, you can register for the webinar and Telelearning Series free of charge on the Kendu MS website, mskendu.org. One last note I do want to make is for those participating live tonight, you will see a survey appear on your computer screen. We do have a new survey format, so please take a moment and complete the survey to share your input. Your feedback helps us continue to improve our webinar and Telelearning Series, so we do appreciate your time in completing that survey. You will also receive a PDF copy of tonight's slides by email, as well as the exercises, the Flourish Factor exercises. Thank you and have a great night. We do appreciate your participation.